同學，今次我們將會學習 difficult structure, no double comparative after prefer. Concept: difficult structure, no double comparative after prefer. 上課提過 prefer to, prefer something to. 今課繼續教 prefer, common errors. Which one is correct? 以下兩句是否正確？ I prefer milk tea to tea. Correct. I prefer milk tea than tea. Not correct. Note: the issue is that than is used for comparisons of a particular quality or quantity. So you use than if you were to say, I like milk tea more than I like tea, or milk tea tastes better than tea. The former has you comparing how much you like each, the latter compares their taste. Prefer is that comparison built into it, so than is not necessary. Prefer 有隱含的比較，不使用 than. You could swap out prefer it for like it more than. We don't use than after prefer. We prefer books to magazines, correct. She prefers books than magazines, not correct. Correct usage: I prefer tea to coffee. We prefer going by ferry to flying. We can use a to infinitive or an ing form after prefer. A to infinitive is more common. She's not keen on coffee. She prefers to drink tea, or she prefers drinking tea to coffee. Would prefer: we use would prefer to prefer followed by to infinitive of a noun to talk about present and future preferences. I would prefer to go by myself. Would you prefer a quieter restaurant? Should prefer not to try at night. We want to say that we would like to do one thing more than another. We can introduce the second thing with rather than, followed by infinitive without to. I prefer to go skiing this year rather than go on a beach holiday. When we are talking about our preferences for the actions on another person, we can use would prefer plus object pronoun plus to infinitive, or would prefer it if plus past simple. They prefer us to come later, or they prefer it if we came later. Would you prefer me to drive? Would you prefer it if I drove? Other typical errors. Number 1. We use a to infinitive after prefer, not an infinitive without to. For example, I prefer to drive, correct. I prefer drive, not correct. For example, whenever I have time, I like to read, but I prefer not to read in the evening, correct. But I prefer not read in the evening, not correct. Number 2. We make comparisons using to or rather than, not just than. For example, a lot of young people prefer computer games to football, correct. Or a lot of young people prefer computer games rather than football, correct. A lot of young people prefer computer games than football, incorrect. Which should you use? Prefer, prefer rather than, prefer than, prefer more than, or prefer instead of? The verb prefer means to like or want someone or something more than someone or something else. Prefer generally takes the preposition to. Prefer instead of, incorrect. Prefer more than, incorrect. And prefer than are incorrect. Task 1. Which of the following are correct? Incorrect. I prefer coffee rather than tea. Correct. I prefer coffee to tea. Incorrect. People prefer watching TV instead of reading. Correct. People prefer watching TV to reading. Incorrect. I prefer jogging than cycling. Correct. I prefer jogging to cycling. Incorrect. I prefer dancing more than singing. Correct. I prefer dancing to singing. While prefer is followed by to in most cases, there's an exception. When prefer is followed by to infinitive rather than is used. Correct. They prefer to live rather than play. Correct. The city prosecutor prefers to step down rather than do his job. It is, however, better to change prefer plus to infinitive to would rather plus infinitive. Correct. They would rather live than pay. Correct. The city prosecutor would rather step down than do his job. Alternatively, use a gerund after prefer and to. Correct. They prefer living to playing. Correct. The city prosecutors prefer stepping down to doing his job. Do not use prefer instead of, prefer more than, or prefer than when a true infinitive follows prefer. Incorrect. He preferred to stay instead of leaving immediately. Correct. He preferred to stay rather than leave immediately. Correct. He would rather stay than leave immediately. Correct. He prefers staying to leaving immediately. Incorrect. I prefer to read more than to listen. Correct. I prefer to read more rather than listen. Correct. I would rather read than listen. Correct. I prefer reading to listening. Incorrect. I prefer to drink water than to drink soda. Correct. I prefer to drink water rather than drink soda. Correct. I would rather drink water than soda. Correct. I prefer drinking water to drinking soda. Remember, he prefers walking to driving. Correct. He prefers walking than driving. Incorrect. True is correct. We use than with other comparative verbs like rather or better. For example, he prefers driving to taking the bus. He would rather drive than take the bus. He likes driving more than taking the bus. Prefers something to something. Prefer to do something rather than do something. Task 2. Choose the best answers to complete each sentence. Number 1. Would you prefer to meet at 6 or 7? Number 2. Who do you prefer, Chelsea or Manchester United? Number 3. Which do you like better, the McDonald's or Burger King? Number 4. Would you rather go to the city or to a countryside? Number 5. I would rather not go to either. Number 6. Who does you like better, you or me? Number 7. Which do you prefer to eat, chocolate or ice cream? Number 8. Would you rather go to the cinema or to a restaurant? Number 9. Which one is correct? A. I would prefer to eat at home rather than go to a restaurant. B. I would prefer eating at home to going to a restaurant. C. I prefer driving to walking. D. I prefer to drive rather than walking. E. I prefer to drive rather than walk. D is incorrect. It should be I prefer to drive rather than walk. A native speaker would be more likely to put it I prefer to drive than walk. Else it might be I prefer driving to walking, or I prefer to drive rather than walk. But in speaking English, I have certainly heard it said I prefer to drive rather than walking. Also, the gerund form of walk can replace the infinitive form and fill the same function in a sentence. Now, do the exercise to test yourself by exercise and answer key. Proofread the following sentences. Put and take a clause at the end of the sentence. Rewrite the sentence to correct the mistakes.